You're listening to 105.3, The Gerblin, Dominaria's #1 music source for generic goblin noise.
Hey gang, using the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, will get you 10% off any order over $10 at Flipside Gaming. It'll also get you 10% off any orders of singles at Multizone. And it'll get you 10% off most products at Original Magic Art, with the exceptions of some paintings. If these fine sites don't have what you're looking for, you can also consider using my affiliate link when ordering from TCG Player. And if you'd like to join the generic Goblin Gang to support this channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Hey gang, looking to get your hands on a free box of Theros Beyond Death? Well, look no further. Flipside Gaming will be giving one away between December 12th and January 27th. You can enter by using my promo code MTGMudsta on an order of $10 or more, or by sending a self-addressed, stamped envelope or postcard to them. It's one entry per person, and for more information, follow the link below. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today we have a very special EDH game where we visit PLANECHASE. Chris is joining us playing Kozilek, keeping a Blast Zone, a Thought Vessel, an Unwinding Clock, Endbringer, Wastes, Urza's Tower, and Basalt Monolith. I am playing the tried and true Trostani, keeping a Soul Ring, Secluded Steppe, Tranquil Thicket, Canopy Vista, Greater Good, Cultivate, and Mirror Pool. Mark is playing his Azor deck, keeping Stolen Identity, Teferi's Moat, 2 Plains, Knight of the White Orchid, Aisha, and Keep Watch. Derek is back, showing his love for Rakdos with a Grenzo Dungeon Warden deck, keeping a Phyrexian Altar, Blood Artist, Telgiad Stylus, Ancient Tomb, Mountain, and a Swamp. Mark wins the die roll, and before starting us off, we flip the first PLANECHASE card. We start the game off by going to Talon Gate, which reads, anytime you can cast a sorcery, you may exile a non-land card from your hand with X time counters on it, where X is its converted mana cost. If the card doesn't have Suspend, it gains Suspend. And, whenever you roll Chaos, remove 2 time counters from each Suspend card you own. Unfortunately, we kinda misunderstand this a little bit, but anyway, Mark plays a Plains and rolls Chaos. He pays another one to roll again, but hits nothing. He then goes to find some dice to suspend his Stolen Identity and pass his turn. Derek plays a Swamp and casts his Telgiad Stylus. I play a tap Canopy Vista and I suspend Cultivate. I then roll and pass to Chris. Chris plays a Wastes and rolls, failing to hit anything and passes to Mark. Mark plays a Plains and remembers to downtick his Stolen Identity. He then rolls Chaos and has to remove 2 counters from his Stolen Identity. He then pays again to roll once more, and we planeswalk to Turi Island, which reads, creature spells cost 2 less to cast. Whenever you roll Chaos, reveal the top 3 cards of your library. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. With nothing else, Mark passes. Derek plays an Ancient Tomb for his land drop, and loses 2 life by tapping it to help cast a Phyrexian Altar. He then rolls Chaos for his free roll, and he reveals a Body Snatcher and a Plague Crafter, and he puts those to hand and the land to his yard. I remove a counter from my Cultivate and cast Soul Ring. I then play a Sungrass Prairie and tap out for an Altar of Dementia. I roll before passing, and then roll again paying the 1, but fail to hit anything relevant. Chris plays a Waste and brings out a Thought Vessel. He rolls and passes. Mark downticks Stolen Identity and rolls. He hits to get us off the plane, and we head to Truga Jungle, which reads, all lands have tap, add 1 mana of any color, and whenever you roll Chaos, reveal the top 3 cards of your library. Put all land cards revealed this way into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Mark then plays out a Knight of the White Orchid, despite wanting to get a land fetch from it, but he really wants a body to put the Stolen Identity onto it in future turns. He then plays a Plains, and rolls again, and passes. Derek plays a Mountain, and taps the Tomb for whatever color he wants, and casts Grenzo Dungeon Warden, putting 1 into the X. This has his commander come in with a +1/+1 counter, and Derek then rolls the Planar Chaos die, and passes. I remove a counter from Cultivate, and play a tap Fortified Village. I roll a few times to try and get us off the plane, but fail, and I pass to Chris. Chris plays an Urza's Mine, tapping it for a Soul Ring, and then has enough to cast a Gilded Lotus. He then taps the Gilded Lotus for a Basalt Monolith, and he rolls to get us off the plane, but fails and passes. Mark down takes his suspended Stolen Identity to its last counter, and he plays an island. He then rolls, hitting nothing, and he taps 2 of each color he needs for a Naisha Tanaka and passes turn. Derek plays a Swamp and loses 2 life to tap his Ancient Tomb for 2 colorless. He activates Grenzo, putting the bottom card to the graveyard, which then comes into play as it's a Siege Gang commander and has power equal to or less than Grenzo. As it comes in, he makes 3 Goblin tokens. Derek then taps 2 for Blood Artist and sacrifices a Goblin once it resolves, draining Mark for 1. He sacrifices another Goblin to the altar to drain Chris this time, and sacrifices the third to drain me for 1 as well. With his now 3 floating mana, he taps the Stylist to put the Siege Gang on the bottom of his library, and then brings it back with Grenzo once more. He makes 3 more Goblins as it re-enters. Moving to combat, Derek then hits me for 3 with Grenzo, and he rolls to get off the plane, and passes. I remove my final counter from Cultivate, finding a Force for the field tapped and 1 for my hand. I then shuffle and draw for turn. I play a Force for turn and roll. We planeswalk away to Trial of the Mage Rings because apparently we like planes that start with the letter T. It reads, Instants and sorceries have rebound. Whenever you roll Chaos, you may search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, and put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. I then pay the 1 to roll again, and planeswalk away, this time to Astral Arena. It reads, no more than 1 creature can attack each combat, and no more than 1 creature can block each combat as well. Whenever you roll Chaos, Astral Arena deals 2 damage to each creature. I then pay 2 more to roll again, and fail to hit anything, and pass. Chris plays a Blast Zone as his land for turn, which comes in with a counter. He then taps 13 mana, and uses some of it to cast a Manifold Key. He then uses the rest to cast Kozilek, and resolves the on-cast trigger, drawing enough cards to bring his hand back up to 7. Chris still has enough mana to cast a Scroll Rack before passing to Mark. Mark removes the final counters from Stolen Identity and gets to cast the spell for free. He targets Kozilek with the spell, and aims to cipher the spell into his knight. Derek responds to this by sacrificing 2 Goblin tokens to the altar, gaining 2 mana, and draining Mark and Chris for 1 apiece. I imagined he'd be going for the Siege Gang commander, but Derek actually activates Grenzo and puts the bottom card from his library into the yard, showing the table of Master of Cruelties, who then comes into play. Mark's spell then resolves and attaches itself to the knight. He then draws for turn. Moving to combat, the knight comes at me for 2. With it connecting, Mark gets to cast Stolen Identity again for free, and this time makes a Gilded Lotus token. We then see a Teferi's Moat come in, and Mark names red with it. He passes, and at the end of turn, I make 1 green and 1 white to cycle my 2 cycle lands and draw 2 cards. Derek plays a Zolfin Void and scries 1. He bottoms it suspiciously. And Derek then takes 2 damage to put to the stack a Pladecrafter. This is thankfully countered by Mark using his Kozilek's ability by discarding a Keep Watch. Derek then sacrifices the Goblin token to the altar, draining Mark for 1. He uses the floating mana for a Body Snatcher, which is also countered, but this time by Chris with his Kozilek, who discards an Unwinding Clock. Derek then rolls and fails to hit anything on the die. He heads to combat, and the Master goes at Chris, who blocks with Kozilek, and Derek then passes. I roll for turn and hit nothing. I then pay 6 mana for See the Unwritten and reveal off the top. I pick the Seedborn Muse and bin the rest. I then play a Mirror Pool, which comes in tapped, and pass, untapping with Chris on his turn. Chris plays a Temple of the False God and pays enough to cast an Endbringer. He then taps more mana and moves to activate his key, which Mark counters by tapping Aisha to counter the artifact's ability as Chris can't pay 1 white. Chris then has to go to plan B, and he casts Alhamret's Archive. Chris then rolls Planar Chaos on the die, and it puts to stack its ability that deals 2 damage to each creature. With the ability on the stack, Derek sacrifices his 2 creatures that'll otherwise die to the altar to make some mana, floating 2 mana and draining Chris and Mark for 1 life apiece. The ability then resolves, and before moving from the phase, Derek activates Grenzo with the 2 floating, and he hits an Emrakul's Hatcher. It comes in and gives him 3 Eldrazi spawns. Mark untaps and draws for turn, and swings his token copy of Kozilek at Derek. It is Menace, which means Derek can't block as he can only block with 1 creature, and not the 2 needed for Menace. Derek takes the hit for 12, and Mark then rolls his free roll, hitting nothing. He brings out Azor in his main phase, and prevents his opponents from casting instants or sorceries until Mark's next turn. At the end of turn, Derek puts the Hatcher on the bottom of his library with the Stylus, and he activates Grenzo to bring it back out, bringing him up to 4 Eldrazi spawn. Derek plays a Luxury Suite as his land for turn, and rolls. He fails to hit anything, and pays to roll again. He then loses 2 more life as he casts a Puppeteer Clique from his hand, who comes in and reanimates my Restoration Angel. The Angel comes in and flickers his Hatcher, giving Derek 3 more spawns. He sacrifices a few of them for some black mana thanks to the Phyrexian Altar, and he casts a Pawn of Ulamog. Heading to combat, Derek swings the Master once more at Chris, who isn't a fan of this decision. This forces Chris to block with Endbringer. In his second main phase, Derek sacrifices the Angel to the altar, gaining 1 more black, and also gains a spawn from his pawn. He then uses the floating black mana and the new spawn to activate Grenzo. This time he bins Ashna's altar for what feels like the first whiff of the game from his Grenzo activation. With nothing else, he passes. I play a Force for my turn and cast Phyrexian Processor, dumping 10 life into it. I then pay 4 to cast Greater Good, and then decide to roll before passing turn, and I hit a Planar Chaos. This puts to stack the ability that'll deal 2 damage to all creatures, and Derek announces he'll have some responses once Chris and Mark pass priority. He sacrifices the Clique for 1 mana, gaining a spawn from the pawn, and then comes back with the Persist trigger resolving. This brings back the Restoration Angel again, who bounces the Hatcher, making 3 more spawns. Once more the Angel gets sacrificed, making another mana and another Eldrazi spawn from the Pawn of Ulamog trigger. He then sacrifices the Persisted Clique for another mana and another spawn. After this, he sacrifices the pawn, and then all of his spawns to float some mana. The damage trigger then goes off, and before leaving the phase, Derek has some stuff to do. He activates Grenzo, hitting Kiki Jiki, and does it again, this time hitting a Smoldering Marsh, which stays in the graveyard. He does it again, hitting a Cauldron of Eternity, and then activates Grenzo again, and this time finds a Faceless Butcher. With the Butcher coming in, Derek sacrifices it with the Enter the Battlefield trigger on the stack, and targets Seedborn Muse with it. With the target on the stack, I also respond, sacrificing my Muse to my altar and mill some cards. Derek then activates Grenzo once more, and this time finds Exelis Conscripts. He activates Grenzo again, hitting Evolving Wilds, and then once more hitting Priest of Urbrask. This brings him back up to a good chunk of mana, and Derek remembers to steal something with the conscripts. He takes Mark's Kozilek and sacrifices it to make mana. Derek then activates Grenzo once more, hitting a Mesmeric Fiend, and does the sacrifice while the Enter the Battlefield triggers on the stack trick once more. He targets Mark with it and exiles a card from his hand forever, this time taking Asperia. Derek then does Grenzo's whole thing again and hits an Urborg. At this point, Derek activates Kiki Jiki to make a copy of the Zealous Conscripts, but in a bit of a brain fart, opts to steal Azor instead, and he then sacrifices Mark's commander for a mana. He activates Grenzo again, this time hitting Imperial Recruiter, and goes to tutor for a creature card. He puts a Tuk Tuk Scrapper to his hand, and Derek then sacrifices 2 more creatures to activate Grenzo again, this time hitting Solemn Simulacrum. He finds a land, and Derek then realizes his mistake at this point, that he could have made infinite mana with his infinite Zealous Conscripts if he'd done the Conscripts and Kiki combo. Thankfully, he figures out a way to do it by activating the Stylus and putting Kiki on the bottom. He's then easily able to sacrifice 2 creatures to put her back out. He can then basically mill out his library, hitting almost every creature in it, and finishes off the table with any of his pingers like Zulpur Cutthroat, Mayhem Devil, Ayara, Judith, etc., and we all agree the game is over. Game review time. So, beyond the fact that I think we all misread the first card, thinking that it was only sorceries that we could suspend, this game was relatively balanced until the end. Mark's Azor deck was based around things like detain, taxing, and not letting people do things, as we saw with Aisha. I'm always a sucker for themed decks, even if they don't necessarily perform well. I think Chris probably would have benefited the most from the suspend on the earlier turns, and then cast Kozilek once his mana rocks came off of suspend. Unfortunately, no one at the table knew how to read English, so that's what happened. Derek's Grenzo deck is probably the perfect example of what a Grenzo deck wants to do. I believe he told me he built it with power 3 or less, so basically he was going to hit any creature that he was able to put into his graveyard with Grenzo's ability. Considering he really only had one scry in the entire game, he got very lucky, and even with his mess up, he was still able to win thanks to the stylus. I'm not too sure what to say about Trostani other than the fact that I wasn't really keeping a great hand, and I didn't really do very much until late game. The idea of using the processor and making a 10-10 and then sacrificing it to greater good every turn was fantastic, but unfortunately, like we saw, Derek went off at the end of my turn. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.